what the bleep is happening in Sudan? Why are bioweapons labs now unsecured? The World Health Organization is warning that biolabs in Sudan are this is their quote, huge biological risk because Sudanese fighters have seized at least one biolab in the capital of Khartoum. Now, where have we heard this before? War zone, biolab, escaped virus. This is very familiar from the not too distant past in Ukraine. The biolabs we're talking about right now, there's just one in particular. It's called the National Public Health Laboratory in Khartoum. Who is behind this lab? Well, hard to say because take a look at their website when you click the About Me page.
Page not found.
Interesting.
That's a great website from like 1997.
Yes.
Like built with a Netscape browser or something.
Speaking of 1997, I searched this in the Wayback Machine to see what did it say before this error code. Is it recent? Was something pulled down because of this compromise of the lab? It seems that this error code has been there since at least 2019, but I can't really be sure because the Wayback Machine is kind of slow and hard to use. But I could tell at least that it's not a recent removal of something. But the homepage does list partners such as the World Health Organization, Brazil, China, Japan, the United Arab Emirates, Save the Children, the World Bank, the United Nations, and the UN World Food Program, just to name a few. So more on this lab in just a minute, but let's just back up and talk about what is happening in Sudan because fighting has been raging for several weeks. And on Monday, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia brokered a 72-hour ceasefire in Sudan. Seems to be holding up. But the WHO is now saying that one side of the fighting parties control this biolab that holds samples of cholera, measles, polio, and other infectious diseases. They're not saying which side. Here is Nima Saeed Abid, who the WHO representative in Sudan, telling us exactly what he's worried about with these labs.
That is extremely, extremely dangerous because we have polio isolates in the lab, we have measles isolates on the lab, we have cholera isolates in the lab. So there is a huge biological risk.
Oh, great.
Sounds good. It was a news piece that added that music, not me. I don't need to get any more dramatic than what he already said. Doesn't need dramatic music. It's already bad. Philip, who's worked in labs, do you have any thoughts on that before we move on?
Do you like polio?
I have no particular love of polio or cholera, but I mean the research that goes on in these biolabs is usually very necessary. It's like got public health in mind. Having them fall into the wrong hands is extremely dangerous because some of the most dangerous things on the planet are in there. Dangerous to humans.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like these biolabs are scary places if they're not rigidly controlled.
And we set them up. It's odd, right, that we set these things up in these countries that we destabilize. It's amazing why, Ukraine has 46 biolabs that are funded in large part by the United States government. And of course, we've tracked and trailed all of to Hunter Biden as well on this and his involvement in this. Just Jenny wrote on our YouTube page earlier today, one of our viewers, Just Jenny, and said, is it any coincidence that Sudanese rebels have taken over a biolab with the very polio viruses that Bill Gates has said will compromise the next pandemic or comprise the next pandemic?
It doesn't feel coincidental.
No.
But nothing does anymore. So, who and what were in that lab and how long have these biolabs been working with all of these other countries? We're going to get back to that in a minute. But first, a little bit about this conflict. Here is Kenyan writer and activist David John Bwakali. He boils down the conflict, I think, far better than I could. So I'm going to leave it to him to explain exactly what's going on in Sudan right now.
Here is why you should care about the fighting that is going on in Sudan. What's happening there is more than meets the eye, and it's time for the world to discuss the actual truth of what is going on there. America and Russia are at it again, just as they did 60 years ago during the Cold War when they fought proxy wars right here in Africa, leading to the death of thousands of innocent Africans. They are at it again in Sudan, fighting a proxy war. Let me explain. Two factions of the Sudanese military are fighting each other. One of them is led by Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan, head of the paramilitary group known as Rapid Support Forces. The other faction is led by the Sudanese Army Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. So why are they fighting? This is where Russia and USA come into the picture. You see, in the last couple of months, Russia has finalized a deal with Sudan to establish Russia's naval base in Sudan's Red Sea coast. America is not too happy with that. Actually, they're furious. America's ambassador to Sudan, John Godfrey, expressly warned Sudan not to seal that deal with Russia, but they're going ahead and doing just that. And so when the paramilitary unit began fighting the other faction of the army, that wasn't happening in a vacuum. The big problem is that you're not going to hear this in the mainstream media. Neither are you going to hear a lot of African governments voicing this, which is very unfortunate because Africa must learn to speak its truth and stand on this truth, because truth will set you free. So it is left to the African people, we the African people, to speak this truth and tell America and Russia to get off Africa, to get their hands off Africa. The days of the Cold War, the days of the shenanigans of the Cold War are completely over, and they cannot fight proxy wars in Africa at the expense of innocent African lives. That has to stop. The fighting in Sudan must stop. The puppet masters must stop their evil, diabolic games.
So I thought that was beautifully said. I think that it's important to remember what the conflicting, who is supporting conflicting sides at this moment. Now, if you watch the mainstream media, what will they tell you is that there are two fighting sides, and it has to do with, them overthrowing a dictator and then now fighting to put a democracy in place. It is absolutely not that simple, but at least now we have an idea of who the two sides are and who they're backed by. And he's right. Sudan has, in fact, been moving forward with Russian projects, and the U.S. is opposing this. Here is a helpful timeline of how that opposition has shaped up in the last year. We found this on Twitter, and it seems...
This is from V. Rosen.
Yes. And it seems like a good timeline of what's been happening. And I've seen some sort of, maybe not comical, but like comments like, when, the U.S. and Victoria Nuland come in, you got a civil war coming on your hands. And that does seem to be what happened, because just last year, the U.S. appointed an ambassador to Sudan after 25 years of not having one. That ambassador warned Sudan against finalizing the Russian naval base. Then Antony Blinken urged Sudan to consider U.S. support for the rapid formation of a civilian-led transitional government. Then the UN brokers framework agreement between Sudan's military leaders and leading pro-democracy parties. Then just in December, again, Blinken threatens a travel ban for Sudanese who endanger framework agreement deal. Fast forward to February, Sudan confirms the deal for the Russian naval base. The key players are Lavrov and Burhan. February 16th, the Biden administration sends $288 million in humanitarian aid to Sudan. Then, a few weeks later, Victoria Nuland visits Sudan to discuss democracy.
Oh, whenever she shows up.
And then just a few weeks later, conflict escalates between these two military groups, and the U.S. evacuates Sudan. So we can see how quickly this has escalated due to the severe fighting between conflicts between Russia and the U.S. So now the U.S. and Saudi Arabia say they have brokered a ceasefire, but on whose behalf? Whose interests are they working for? Can the U.S. lobby on behalf of the Sudanese people? If they had their interests at heart, they would have said, you brokered this deal with Russia. We didn't have anything to do with it, so we're going to stay out of it, if that's what you guys want to do, right?
Right.
That they're not doing that. They're actually actively working to thwart projects that the Sudanese government has decided is good for them. Is that any of our business? Who is Saudi Arabia representing here? They're in between allies, between the U.S. and China. So, who are they working to protect, or who are they working for? I don't know. It's an interesting bedfellows that we've got the U.S. and Saudi Arabia trying to broker these peace deals. And now, finally, who has biolabs to protect? Well, the U.S. has had major interest in biolabs in Sudan since the late 90s, when President Clinton bombed the shit out of a Sudanese pharmaceutical factory called Al Shifa. This factory made medicines. In fact, it made over half of the medicines that the Sudanese people relied upon. Clinton falsely claimed that they were making chemical weapons, and he attacked as a retaliation for Osama bin Laden's bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The Clinton administration said that they, quote, had soil samples taken outside the plant and that they showed that there had been a presence of a substance known as EMPTA, whose only function was to make nerve gas VX. The plant, they said, was heavily guarded and it showed a suspicious lack of ordinary commercial activities. They also claimed that Osama bin Laden had financial interests in the plant. All of that was a lie.
Of course.
None of that was true. Now, incidentally, in 2006, the owner of this factory sued the U.S. government for bombing his factory. But the case was dismissed in court because the government won its request for a dismissal for, quote, failure to establish waiver of sovereign immunity. So that guy never really got that far, but he, in his documents, said that he could prove that the United States bombed his private property, his business, and that they did so under false pretenses.
Kal-El in our chat, thank you for the super chat. Kal-El says, one has to think, Clayton, does another proxy war keep Sudan impoverished and run down so that corruption and U.S. control will be easy for American companies to plunder Sudan's resources? You hit the nail on the head, Kal-El.
Yeah. Superman.
You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what we do in destabilizing these countries. The same thing we're going to talk about Haiti in just a moment.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, thankfully, after this factory that made half of the country's medicines was bombed to smithereens, the United States stepped in with private companies to help get the people of Sudan medicine. American pharmaceutical companies happily stepped in after the U.S. government bombed their competition. Which brings us to this question. So we know now there are American interests in pharmaceuticals in Sudan. We know now that there is some kind of biolab that has been compromised and is controlled by one side of fighting forces. Do we know if there are American interests there? We don't really know that yet. This, again, sort of though would parallel what's happening in Ukraine, where Russian forces insist that they are finding American bioweapons projects in Ukraine in the territory that they are taking over actively still. In these Russian-backed forces, is it now the Russian-backed forces in Sudan that is going into this lab, and then maybe you're going to tell us something else that the United Nations is going to pretend not to hear or go like this about? We don't know, but it's happening in Ukraine, so it would be quite coincidental. And can we be sure that the U.S. interest in this lab was on the up and up? Was it gain of function? We don't know. We do know, though, that the U.S. National Institute of Health has, since this conflict broke out, pulled down information from its website, linking it to Ebola research in Sudan involving monkeys. Here is what was on the NIH. Now, remember, the NIH is an American health organization. It was the one related to Fauci before he retired. This article it still shows up in your search results. If you search for it, it makes like you could find it. Then if you go to click it, here is what you'll find. Page is not available anymore. So why are they removing these projects with Sudanese labs from their website so recently, especially this one's from 2016? This article is about experimental vaccines. This next one I'm going to show you is about an experimental vaccine on macaques for a Sudan virus. But the press release, am I saying that wrong?
Macaques?
Macaques.
Macaques? Okay, sorry.
It's a monkey.
It's a primate, right?
Yeah. So not macaw. I was thinking macaw, but no, macaques.
Okay.
Type of monkey, right?
Excuse me, I'm not up on my zoology pronunciation. So this press release says that the NIH has been funding this project, but the research was done in Montana. It was on the Sudan virus, but in a lab in Montana. So we don't know right now. We know that a biolab that had viruses is not secure. We know that the lab had known viruses, but we don't know if there are any gain of function projects going on there. I'm thinking maybe if they're sort of putting up or taking down these connections, possibly. We don't know whose side is in control of the lab, but we know that the WHO is freaking out about it. And we do know that the people of Sudan are absolutely caught in the crosshairs of global powers and proxy wars, and that's not news.
So someone in the chat saying maybe the website, the page isn't down. It's that they're not letting you connect to it, which I don't know what the difference is. If you can't connect to it, the page doesn't.
Did you search
Well, it's
it
kind of
yourself?
like the perfect
I'm just saying
crime. They put these things in these places where people are, and with no congressional oversight. There's no oversight they have to follow there. There's probably less regulations on safety in these places, and if it gets released, what do we care? They're desert people.
Right. Yeah. Let's test it over there. I mean, it's just exactly what Adam Schiff said, right? That's why we fight Russia over there, so we don't have to fight them here. We have biolabs over there, so if stuff gets out, well, it's the Ukrainians, right? We don't care about them at all. We don't care about their children. In fact, it's just like in Sudan today, we now know in Ukraine, Russia is saying that the United States is using Ukraine's soil. We have now confirmed that the depleted uranium munitions have arrived and are being used in Ukraine. Who's going to clean up that soil? The United States is like, we're not touching that. It's going to be irradiated soil for years. We don't care about those people. We don't care about the country will be rendered useless. We don't care about Sudan. We don't care about any of these places where we meddle in it. All we care about is the United States, and even that is questionable at best.
Yeah. So this seems like a conflict that is going to require attention for the foreseeable future. It's not going to go away in any kind of easy. The media may lose their interest in it, but let's us not.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.